While I'm still working my way through Alan Wake 2, and that's been taking most of my gaming time recently, I have for a while wanted to get started on something a little bit different. At the end of the day, this channel is really all about personal indulgence, so bear with me. I have a list of a bunch of older games that are historically significant, or that I simply remember from years ago for one reason or another, and have always wanted to revisit. These cross platforms and generations, but the game I've decided to start with is The Legend of Zelda. My personal history with Zelda starts primarily with A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, which I played over years, eventually even reaching Ganon at the end of the game. I had, though to my shame no longer have, a gold cartridge from pre-ordering Ocarina of Time, a fantastic game that was one of the few that made me feel a little bit better about sticking with Nintendo during the N64 era. I have fond memories of Wind Waker, and while I have to admit that in the last 15 years, From Software's games have very much taken over the mantle of my favorite action role-playing games, I did also play Breath of the Wild. And while it wasn't my favorite for a few reasons, and it took me picking it up and putting it down a few times to complete, the world was wonderful to explore, and I appreciated the series taking a risk and going a different direction that I think it needed. All that said, I've never really sat down and played the first Zelda. I recall a friend or two having a copy way back when, the shiny gold cartridge, and seeing some of the game here and there, but never really playing it myself. So this seems a fitting spot as any to start on my list. Faced with this prospect, I'm a little worried. I'd like to challenge myself to beat the game using only the mechanisms native to it, and figuring things out myself as much as I can. Given limited gaming time, will I have the patience to do it? Will I be able to do it, depending on the puzzle or action difficulty, or obtuse, dated design? Having spent a couple hours with the game now, I still don't think I can answer these questions, but this is how things have gone down so far. I started off finding a copy of the manual on Nintendo's website, for kicks. There was quite a bit of useful info. This included some story and character setup that really isn't present in the game, but it was also full of hints, basically a strategy guide and map that I didn't really want to look at, even though I would find myself happy to make use of the item index for details on how some things worked. While brief, what a nice reminder of what game manuals used to be, and the times I'd spend in the car reading through the manual of a game I'd rented for a weekend while stuck out on errands with my parents, back when renting games was a thing you could do. Starting the game, you're of course faced with little direction and no real options other than to explore. I'd been spoiled enough over time that I knew to head into the cave first, but of course that's the most enticing thing on the first screen anyway. From there, I started walking with the intent of writing down the directions to anything I found. I quickly realized this would be a bit harder than I pictured. While there's a map that shows your position, there are no coordinates or other landmarks to refer to your location. I shifted then to counting the number of screens I'd moved in each direction, first from the starting screen, then relative to other discoveries I had already recorded directions to. This still required some backtracking to make sure I was getting it right, but seemed reasonably efficient. I first headed east along the bottom of the map, and then turned north as I got a little used to the different enemy types, and just how many things could show up and hound you on certain screens. Using the shield to block projectiles was surprisingly satisfying, and the power drop when having anything less than full health and losing your sword projectile was palpable. It was a little surprising just picking up some bombs dropped from an enemy, rather than having to find any new items in a dungeon, though that certainly came to pass as well. I also realized I really need a controller with a better directional pad. The first dungeon, or level 1 as the game calls it, was pretty easy to stumble across in the forest near the starting area, across an unusual bridge extending into the water. This area didn't pose too much of a challenge, aside from the Green Dragon boss, but even that fight became trivial walking in with full health and being able to strike from a distance. The boomerang found here would prove vital to being able to punch beyond my weight and take on many harder enemies than I'd be able to otherwise, and push my exploration farther. This first dungeon also had me experimenting with death. Dying on the overworld returns you to the starting screen. Death in a dungeon returns you to the entrance to the dungeon. No items are lost, no money is lost, your health is refilled. Progress made in the dungeon is retained, although enemies generally return. Aside from resources you may have used before dying, there is no real penalty to death. Since 2009 and the release of Demon's Souls, the Souls games kind of took my attention away from Zelda, and for many good reasons. Looking back, I think I was especially justified in seeing a comparison between the two. It's amazing how directly Souls lifted some of these elements from Zelda, and how central they are in this game. Things like taking risks, using death to your advantage to gain knowledge, or an item to help you on your next run. This is especially effective in dungeons, which haven't been too large or taken too long to traverse so far. In the interest of not carrying on too much for the first entry in this series, it goes without saying that there was plenty more to explore after level 1. I headed to the northeast corner of the map, and then west across the river into more dangerous territory. I found level 3 pretty quickly. It was a challenge to progress through. There were these resilient night enemies that had to be killed to unlock a couple of doors. I mostly had to resort to bombs to take them out, but only 8 bombs can be carried at a time, which kind of limited my longevity. I will have to return to the boss here, but I did snag the raft item that should open up some more exploration. From there, I progressed through the nearby forest maze, first simply by heading right from the repeating screen, then using the north, west, south, and west directions provided by a woman in a cave that tricked me out of most of my money. This led to a very dangerous area filled with tough enemies that I still haven't been able to fully explore. I found other clues about things to watch out for. Meet the old man in the graveyard, or find the old man by the waterfall. Both of these turned out to house new swords that I couldn't yet use. I assume these require a certain number of hearts, which I think is a requirement in some later Zelda games, to use the Master Sword, for example. In just a couple of hours, it seems like I've covered a great deal of the overworld, but I've only found 3 of 8 dungeons, somehow. Even level 2 continues to elude me. I'm at least not stuck yet, and next time I have some goals to pursue. I need to figure out how to get 250 rupees to buy a blue ring I found that should reduce the damage I take. That would be very helpful. I need to find and clear more dungeons so I can get hearts and hopefully pick up those swords to use and do a bit more damage. I also need to figure out how to use the raft and see what new places it can take me. All in all, it's been a really fun first couple of hours. Of course, starting out you have all the easy stuff to do and discover. How much harder and slower it will get now, I'll have to see. I'm eager to return and find out how things go, keeping my fingers crossed. As more interesting things happen, slow or otherwise, I'll be sure to provide an update. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know any tips you might have down in the comments, without spoilers please. And until next time, take care.